sound. All right, so last time I talked about two core processes of ACT. I talked about the acceptance part of accepting reality as it is, not as we want it to be, and accepting our emotional life as it is and our thoughts that may come, even if we don't agree with them. And then the second part of ACT is the commitment part, where we take actions based on our values. I also did the leaves on a stream exercise, and we were able to kind of practice that together. I also talked about how language gets us stuck, and so we tend to use some control strategies to try to get us unstuck. Today, I'm going to be going a little bit further in this, and I'm going to be talking about relational frame theory, how our minds construct meaning through language. And so I'll be kind of giving some introduction to relational frames and then how that contributes to mental health issues. I'll also talk about how we relate to discomfort, our willingness versus our unwillingness to have the pain or discomfort. And then we'll do an experiential exercise to shift our relationship with difficult thoughts and emotions. And so, if you ever done the physicalizing exercise, that's something that I'll show you and demonstrate later on in this video. So, let's talk first about introduction to mindfulness and just kind of get ourselves right as we get into relational frame theory, how relationships affect us, and then how to transform those. So where you're at, if you don't mind just joining me, we're just gonna kind of take a moment to kind of get ourselves present and ready to just be here, be together. And so this exercise is one I love to do in sessions to introduce mindfulness, and it's called hand to heart. So first, I want you to get in a comfortable position that's sitting down and upright, and then I want you to make sure that your feet are touching the ground. Go ahead and put your hands on your knees and just kind of rest them there. And then I want you to take two breaths. So I want you to inhale through your nose and then exhale through your mouth slowly. Let's do one more of those. And exhale. Now I want you to keep your eyes open or close them, whichever is your preference. I want you to be able to focus on your sensations. So try to point your attention, if you're able to point your attention to the bottoms of your hands as they make contact with your knees. And I want you to notice just what that sensation is like. You can go ahead and kind of just move your hands just slightly and make contact either with your bare skin or with your clothing material. So I am wearing jeans, so I'm just feeling the texture on my knees. Okay. Next, I want you to point your attention to the bottoms of your feet. So first, go ahead and point them to your toes and just kind of wiggle your toes if you can. And just notice what that sensation is like. Next, I want you to roll your feet so you can kind of get the ball of your feet firmly on the ground and kind of move back to your toes, kind of like you're rocking. And I want you to see if you can really contact the ground. Notice what that sensation is like on the bottom of your feet. Next, I want you to go ahead and put your focus back on your hands. But this time, I want you to focus it on your right hand. And then I want you to move your right hand to your heart. So you can just put it right above your heart. Continue to breathe in and out and just feel that sensation as your hand makes contact with your chest. So feel the clothing or the bare skin. If there's any temperature, whether cool or warm, any sound, vibration that you could feel through your hand. And some people can notice even their chest moving back and forth as with each inhale and exhale. and even your heartbeat. Maybe it's beating fast, slow. All right, you can go ahead and put your hands back to your knees, and that completes this introduction to mindfulness. I want you to go ahead and put your experience in the comments and just kind of tell me kind of what that experience was like. What did you notice? For a lot of people, they don't really ever pay attention to the bottoms of their feet. And so when I ask them to wiggle their toes, that could be just a new experience for them, even though every day they probably do that. And so I talked about the power of noticing, how we can point our attention. We can select things that we want to tune into and also select things we want to tune out of. And so this is a good introduction to just being here in the moment and pointing our attention to our one of our five sensations. Our thoughts and emotions are always moving, but we can return to the present moment, anytime that we want. We don't have to get caught in the past or the future, whether in rumination or worry. So it's kind of nice to be able to practice that. All right, so we're going to transition here to introducing relational frame theory and kind of understanding how thoughts gain power through language. Now, relational frame theory is the theory of science behind acceptance and commitment therapy. And so it's kind of hard to understand what uh, ACT is trying to accomplish if you don't have an understanding of relational frame theory. The way that ACT approaches thoughts is different than CBT and other modalities, and people can have maybe a reaction to that, and not really see what's going on. And so RFT kind of pulls back the layers, and it's kind of like taking off your phone screen, and you can really see all the things that make it work. And for some people, they're interested in all those details, and they really want to know what's going on. And for some people, they don't really care as long as it works. And so this isn't for everybody, but I think if you're learning ACT and you're wanting to use the skills, you should probably have some understanding of RFT. So first off, our minds don't work, our minds don't just link words, but we build complex relational networks. This happens when we're very young and learning language. Sometimes it can happen faster, and sometimes it can happen slower. There's something called generativity, of language, where a child who's learning how to talk it'll start to be slow. They might make sounds like dada, mama, referring to an object or person in the world. And it's really exciting. We note that, hey, their first word was dada, their first word was mama. Uh, or some kids, they might just put together their fingers like this that indicates more. So we get excited when they start to put these relational networks in place. But there's something that happens when they get to about 50 words to 100 words, where all of a sudden the rate of learning increases dramatically. And so they call this generativity of language. And this is a pretty exciting phenomenon. I think for people studying language, there is kind of a clue or curiosity as far as what they can what how we can explain why that happens. And so it's kind of like a multiplication effect, and we've kind of wondered what happens. Well, RFT has this theory of how these relational frames first develop and then how they expand so rapidly. And so I'll kind of explain a little bit how this happens. Now, first, relational frames shape how we experience the world and emotions. If we didn't have these frames, we wouldn't correlate it to something in our environment. Our thoughts have power over how we interpret the world, and our emotions inform us on what we should be doing, how we should be acting. Now, there's some core types of relational frames. I'm not going to go through all of them. If you're interested, I want to say there's 11 relational frames, and you can just Google that and kind of look over what some of those relational frames are. But I'll give some of the common ones. One that kids first develop is sameness. or coordination. So, for example, a dog is a pet, and also a pet is a dog. There's these things that are like, okay, they're the same. A equals A. All right, there's the same, or A equals B. It's the same. And so they may start to indicate that early on, in coordinating that, milk is the same as a bottle, or the same as mom. So these sameness coordinations are kind of automatic. We don't really even think about them, but they're there in our world and how we see the world. The second one is opposites. So that soon develops after the coordination of sameness, where then they start to understand that something is not like the other. And so, like, happy is the opposite of sad. They're very different experiences. Or black is the opposite of white. Warm is the opposite of cool. And so these start to develop their understanding of sameness and differences, and it helps them to then have distinction, to to start to differentiate and discriminate things in their world. The next level would be hierarchy. And so this is where it gets more put into like an index or a system of understanding, where these relational frames start to stack. So, like, a teacher is a kind of worker, or I'm going to go to work, and there's different jobs, and there are all sorts of jobs and fields. But a worker is also a kind of person. And so there's a lot of things like that where hierarchy, can start to be seen. Um, yeah, even like kids when I'm trying to think 8 to 12, they're starting to compare themselves to others and kind of where they stack. And they can be very sensitive to competition, to, uh, you know, performing. If they didn't win, they could have big reactions because it's really important. They want to stack up towards the rest. And so they can be very sensitive to that. The next one would be spatial. And so this is where we start to put things in their place, like near, far, uh, and uh, when kids are learning like the planets, they can start to say, okay, the sun is kind of the center, and then there's Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, and so forth, and they can start to uh, kind of put things in their place. This is something that continues to learn as our brains develop, but the relational frames are pretty important to kind of placing things in relationship to the self. There's a sense of perspective too that goes along with spatial, where we know where we're located in our consciousness. So this is something called I, here, now. And so there's a very much like I have a perspective in which I see everything else. And kids begin to learn this around 4 to 6, that other people are conscious too. Other people have perspective too. And it helps them to kind of understand the difference between there, you, then, and I, here, now. Does that make sense? So there's some spatial understanding of perspective. And another one that's pretty common is size, or value. That, like, an elephant is bigger than a dog is bigger than a cat is bigger than a mouse, and they can understand relationships according to their size. Also, smaller than, bigger than, larger than, those are all forms of size. Uh, RFT explains these as arbitrarily um, arbitrary relations. So uh, these aren't things that are coordinated in the world necessarily, uh, like the sameness and coordination is. But there can be things like value that can be very different. For example, a nickel is worth 5 pennies. A dime is worth 10 pennies, and a dime is worth more than a nickel. All these things are things that aren't actually, shown in the world. I guess you could put 10 pennies and then a dime, but they're things that a social context has created, or at least decided, okay, arbitrarily, this is what this means, and this is what this means. And so sometimes a child can be frustrated when they are given a dime and somebody else is given a nickel because their minds might say, well, size might, it means value. Okay, so if a nickel is bigger than a dime, it must will be worth more. Therefore, he got more than I got. And so they learn quickly though to alter their relational frames and their understanding of the world. I don't mean to go like too high level, and so if I'm not making sense, feel free to let me know. So there's arbitrarily applicable responding. That's kind of what it's called, where we're responding to things based on what they mean in our world. The other part of that is something called derived relational responding. And if I can go back to the point that I made earlier, which is the theory of generativity of language. Like, why does it start to multiply so quickly, exponentially? What's going on there? Well, it's something called derived relational responding, where a parent might teach a child that A equals B, or that A also is the same as C. And that child, without being taught, will have a derived responding to that, saying, okay, if A equals B, then B must equal A, and C must equal A. And then they start to make this new connection that, okay, I know that A equals C, so B equals C, and C equals B, and so forth. And all of a sudden, you've taught two relations, but they've derived four more. So now there's six. And so this is something that's pretty neat. They start to put everything together in these networks uh, that are vast. And so this is just teaching them one relational frame or two relational frames. The child begins to derive many more relationships. Now, this is great when it comes to learning language. It helps you to understand the world in which you were born in and raised in. And as things change in our culture, change in our families, at school, all these new informations that are coming our way, we're able to understand them because of these relational frames. But there is a blessing in language, and there's also a curse to language. Without language, we wouldn't know how we wouldn't suffer as much. Or a lot of our suffering is because of the networks that we've created. Now, every experience builds a new association in the mind, and these relational frames can start to uh, be very hard to break. Now, a word like failure, might mean failure to, perform a task or failure on assignment in school. But pretty soon it can start to take another form where it means not just means not succeeding, but over time it might expand into uh, emotions such as shame or memories from childhood that you know, start to impact the adult life. Anxiety starts to come into the picture about the future, trying to avoid a failure. Commitment, when we're making a commitment, failure is kind of lurking as, oh my, well, I don't want to fail that person. Maybe I shouldn't try. Or when new responsibilities start to be put on us at work, that sense of failure, starts to come into that frame. So you can see how it starts to impact our life. Uh, context context also matters. A joke, for example, can be funny, but it can also be offensive depending on who says it and where it's said and when and how it's said. For example, if I said that outfit makes you look chubby, and I said that to my wife, that might offend her. And I might be sleeping on the couch. But if I said it in reference to our dog and the outfit that she got for Christmas, it's a little elf outfit that lights up. If I said the same thing, that outfit makes you look chubby, everybody around me might start to laugh it's funny because she kind of does look a little bit, round and chubby. It's not offensive, it's funny. And so context matters to relational frames. And this is where we get to this idea of transformation of stimulus function. It's the meaning of a word, thought, or experience that shifts based on its connections. This is a very important concept to learning ACT because we are trying to bring about a change to these relational networks. So some people can develop a fear based on an experience, and it can start to transform what they know about that object or experience. For example, a snake, if you have had a run-in with a snake or not, you kind of associate a snake with danger. So a toy snake with like a little rattler might trigger a fear response, just like, ooh, I gotta look at my environment. Is there a snake around me? Uh, Public speaking, for example, that could also bring about a relational frame of embarrassment, which can cause anxiety well before you even have a public speaking engagement. Now, this is the way I explain this to a client is like a car. As a child, you learn what a car is, and then there's a variety of cars. There's different cars, uh, and and you know what's not a car. Uh, if you were to get into a car wreck, that would transform that stimulus function. It's not just a car, like the word car, the way it sounds, the word written car, the object car, and it's an experience of driving in a car or driving a car. And if you're in a car wreck, it can all of a sudden start to change what you know about the car. And so now the car is a feared stimulus. It's transformed. So transformation of stimulus function occurs when we start to add these network, these relational frames. And so ACT helps to undo this. It helps us to expand our networks, and it does it through something called willingness to experience pain and discomfort. It's kind of taking that opposite approach. Now, one simple metaphor that I use is called the two knobs metaphor. And so I want you to imagine two dials, like a car stereo. And on one dial is pain. And now this could be anxiety, depression, or psychological discomfort. But this knob ranges from 1 to 10 in intensity. The second knob is willingness. Now, this knob controls how open you are to experiencing pain rather than fighting it. And so, if you have a value, you have something that you is really important to you, how willing are you to have that experience if it brings discomfort and pain? Now, we can't always control the pain knob, can we? Sometimes it's intense, like a 6 or a 7, and maybe like a medication might help bring it down to a 4, uh, or maybe a 3, but we can't directly control our pain. And so avoidance creeps in to say, okay, well, I'll just avoid those things and that'll help lower the pain. But actually creates a different kind of pain because now you're missing out on things that are important and valuable. Willingness is something we do directly control, and we have an ability to respond to any situation by choosing to be willing. And so this is the paradox here is that the more that we resist pain, the louder it gets. And the more that we allow it, the less power it gets. So although we can't directly affect the pain knob, by becoming more willing to experience and having those, it kind of adds an exposure effect. And so we can begin to um, reduce the pain and discomfort. So it has this transformation of function. Okay. So it's a little opposite, it's a little different. It does it through willingness and acceptance of the pain that will come. So here's some questions to reflect on. When discomfort shows up, do I turn the willingness knob up or down? Ask yourself that. And what happens when I allow discomfort instead of fighting it? What begins to change in me as I begin to put myself out there, even even if there may be more pain and discomfort. And this is where you can get to your lived experience, like of actually experiencing the concepts in ACT. Because if you are experiencing something that's not, reducing the overall symptoms over time, and also improving life situations because you're living your values, then I would say throw all this out. And that's the risk of teaching something like ACT. If it doesn't actually change your experience, then there's no reason in listening to it. So I want to do this through an experiential exercise. And so I got a couple minutes here, the next 5 minutes that I'll show you this exercise called the physicalizing exercise and how it begins to transform stimulus function. Um, so this is something where we would set up a way to ground in the present moment. So kind of like we did earlier, where we did the hand to heart exercise. Just take a couple breaths and kind of get here in the moment. And then I want you to begin to explore an emotion that you have that tends to bring a lot of pain or discomfort. And so when you have that, I want you to uh, try to create an image or object of what that emotion is like. How does it best fit? Okay, so I want you to think of an object, something that's real in the world that I would understand and you would understand. And what really seems to come to mind when you think of that emotion? So it could be emotion like depression, anxiety, uh, failure, or an experience like failure. Could be a memory that you've had that evokes a lot of feeling. But I want you to put that as an object. Now, once you've done that, I want you to kind of set it out here about 4 to 6 feet in front of us. And I want you to put it on the floor. Now, I'm not going to be able to see it, so I need to ask some questions. Okay. So, if it had a color, what color would it be? If this feeling had a size, how big would it be? If it had a speed, how fast would it go? If it had a shape, what would it be? If it had a weight, how much would it weigh? Imagine being able to reach out and touch it. What temperature would it have? I'm going to try to put these in the comments so you can see those questions. Just begin to reflect on that. What would it look like? Now, I've had clients give me a variety of objects. For one client, he gave me a Rubik's Cube, and he said, it's not just one, it's like 1,000 of them. And this is my anxiety. It's like I have so many things to do, and I don't know how to solve it. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to make things work. And it's overwhelming. And I thought that was a great, great object. And so he had that one. Another one was a box, not a heavy box, but a pretty sizable box that he had to carry around to represent depression. And we talked about how to interact with that object. What could you do? So for anxiety, he could learn how to solve a problem and begin to work it on just one of those. And that would begin to transfer and translate to the other problems of life. And ask help. If you don't know how to do it, ask help. I told him I watched a 12-year or I think maybe 14-year-old kid on YouTube teach me how to do a Rubik's Cube. And now I know it. Um, with the box, what could he do? Could he put it in the car and take it with him? And these are things that begin to come up as you think about the object. Another one was a waterfall that explained deep sadness and grief after losing somebody important to them. And so that was an object, but it was an interesting one because that's like so massive, like the Niagara Falls. So once you have the object, what I invite you to do is to kind of pick it up, and I want you to shrink it so that it could fit into your hand. And you visualize that being shrunken and about the size of your hand. And then we talk about um, that experience. What is that like to hold that emotion? And then to end the exercise, I have them put that onto their heart and kind of put it back inside them, like they're placing it inside their lungs. and to have a couple deep breaths. And just to imagine the air kind of filling their lungs around it, and to notice that you have space for that emotion. You have space for that experience. And then we begin to discuss that. Something like this can be helpful for us both as somebody who's benefiting from ACT and trying to use it for our own mental health, but also to help others. Sometimes we get so stuck in the emotion that when we talk about it or the events, it's like we get fused and we're in it. And an exercise like this helps us to objectify that emotion, to kind of put it out there and make it physical. And it can be something that can be understood now. We can interact with it. And then putting it back in to our chest is kind of that acceptance piece of saying it's going to be with me, and there is enough room, there is enough space. All right. I appreciate you guys being with me on this, whether you're joining live or watching it on replay. I know this is new, and I hope to be able to offer this on a consistent basis. I'm looking at every 2 weeks on Wednesdays at noon. I'm not always going to promise it's going to be just like at that time, but right now it works in my schedule, and I really enjoy kind of putting together uh, what it kind of looks like in a session with a client. And so feel free to bring kind of your perspective on it, what you learned from this, and any suggestions you have for future live streams. The next one, I believe, will be February 12th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. And so until then, hope you have a great rest of your day. And just remember to live with purpose and vitality and a values based life. All right.